It was the kind of love story you see in movies, a whirlwind romance. Two souls finding each other against all odds. For Mark, marrying David was a dream come true. David was young, just 27, full of life and a bright, infectious energy. He had a way of making everything seem possible, of turning a gray day into something vibrant and full of color. Their home was a sanctuary, a testament to the life they were building together, brick by loving brick. Friends and family saw it too. They were the perfect couple, the ones who made you believe in forever. Every day felt like a new beginning. A fresh page in a beautiful story they were writing side by side. But even in the brightest sunlight, shadows can linger. Mark began to notice small things, tiny cracks in the perfect facade of their life. It started with the late-night phone calls. David would step outside to take them, his voice a low murmur, almost a whisper against the dark. He'd come back inside with a strange smile, offering vague explanations about work or a friend in need. Then there were the unexplained trips, sudden business emergencies that pulled him away for days at a time. The excuses were always plausible, always just reasonable enough to push Mark's doubts away, but they left a cold, unsettling feeling in his gut. A feeling he couldn't quite name. The distance between them grew, not in miles, but in the quiet spaces of their home. It was in the way David's eyes would drift away mid-conversation, lost in a world Mark wasn't invited into. The easy laughter that once filled their rooms was replaced by a tense silence, heavy with unspoken questions. Mark tried to ignore it, to convince himself it was just the stress of a new marriage, the pressures of life. He loved David, and love meant trust, didn't it? He clung to the memory of the man he married, the man who had promised him a lifetime of honesty and devotion. Yet, the nagging feeling persisted, a constant, low hum of anxiety in the back of his mind. It was a premonition, a sense that the ground beneath his feet was not as solid as he believed. It was the feeling of being an actor in a play where he was the only one who didn't know his lines. He would watch David sleep, this man he shared a bed and a life with, and wonder who he truly was. The love was still there, a powerful, aching love. But now, it was tangled with a new, terrifying emotion. Fear. Fear of what he might find if he started pulling at the loose threads. The first real thread appeared on a credit card statement, a charge for a florist, in a small town in Texas, a town Mark had never heard of, and one David had certainly never mentioned. It was an oddity, a piece of a puzzle that didn't fit. When Mark asked about it, David brushed it off with a casual wave of his hand. "A mistake," he said. A wrong charge that he would get sorted out. He was so convincing, so nonchalant, that Mark almost believed him. Almost. But the name of that small Texas town echoed in his mind, a discordant note in the symphony of their lives. It was an anchor point for his growing suspicion. Driven by a need he couldn't suppress, Mark turned to the one place where secrets often hide in plain sight: the internet. With trembling hands, he typed David's name into the search bar, along with the name of that Texas town. He didn't know what he expected to find. Maybe a business listing, an old address, something innocuous that would put his mind at ease. What he found instead was a social media profile, a woman's profile. And in her photos, smiling back at him, was his husband, David. But he wasn't alone. He was standing with the woman, his arm wrapped tightly around her, and in her arms, she held a small child. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Mark stared at the screen, his heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against his ribs. He clicked through the photos, each one a fresh stab of betrayal. There was David at a child's birthday party, wearing a goofy party hat. There he was on a beach, the woman and child by his side, the picture of a happy family on vacation. The dates on the photos lined up with David's business trips. The flowers from the credit card statement were likely for this woman, this other life, this other family. It was all there, a carefully documented history of a man living a double life. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him. Who was this woman? Who was this child? He scrolled through her posts, her public declarations of love for her wonderful husband. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying finality. His husband, the man he had vowed to love and cherish, was not just his. He was someone else's husband too, someone else's father. The life they had built together, the love he believed was uniquely his, was all a lie. A shared fantasy built on a foundation of deceit. The perfect life was a sham, and he was the unwitting fool at the center of it all. The discovery sent Mark into a spiral of disbelief and heartbreak. He spent hours, days, lost in a digital rabbit hole, piecing together the timeline of David's deception. Every business trip, every late-night call, every penny of unaccounted-for money now had a face and a name. He found a wedding registry, a birth announcement, an entire life that ran parallel to his own, hidden just beneath the surface. He felt like a detective in the worst kind of mystery, where the victim was his own heart and the villain was the person he loved most in the world. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable, and utterly devastating. Sleep became a stranger. Mark would lie awake at night, next to the man who was a living, breathing lie. He would listen to the steady rhythm of David's breathing and feel a chilling sense of disconnect. He was sharing his bed with a complete stranger. It was an intimate and profound form of betrayal, one that infected every memory they had ever made. Was their first date a lie? Their wedding vows? Every "I love you now" seemed to mock him, each word a carefully crafted piece of fiction. The confusion was a thick fog, making it hard to think, hard to breathe. The emotional toll was immense. One moment he would be consumed by a white-hot rage, a desire to scream and throw things and demand answers. The next, he would dissolve into tears, mourning the loss of a future that had never really existed. He was grieving a man who was still alive, sleeping soundly in the next room. This emotional whiplash left him exhausted and hollowed out. He looked in the mirror and saw a ghost, a man haunted by the truth. He had to tell someone, but who? How could he explain that his entire marriage was a lie without feeling like a complete and utter fool? Mark knew he had to confront David. The thought was terrifying. It meant the end of everything, the final, shattering collapse of the world he had so carefully built. But living with the secret was eating him alive. It was a poison, seeping into every corner of his existence. He rehearsed the conversation in his head 100 times, trying to find the right words to express the hurricane of pain and betrayal raging inside him. He needed to hear it from David's own lips. He needed to see the look in his husband's eyes when the lies finally ran out. The confrontation was inevitable. It was a storm gathering on the horizon, and he knew he had to walk directly into it. The day of the confrontation arrived, heavy and gray, mirroring the storm in Mark's soul. He waited until David came home from work, watching him go through the familiar routine of dropping his keys in the bowl by the door and loosening his tie. The normalcy of it all felt like a cruel joke. Mark's heart hammered against his chest, a drumbeat counting down to the moment his life would shatter. He finally broke the silence, his voice steadier than he expected. "David," he said, "we need to talk. I know about Texas." The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy, and the color drained from David's face. David's first reaction was denial. He tried to laugh it off, to dismiss it as a misunderstanding. He threw out a flurry of excuses, each one more desperate and less believable than the last. He accused Mark of being paranoid, of snooping, of trying to create drama where there was none. It was, honestly, a masterful performance of deflection, a tactic Mark now realized David must have perfected over years of living his double life. But Mark stood his ground. He didn't raise his voice. He simply laid out the evidence, piece by damning piece. The photos, the dates, the name of his other wife, the name of his child. As the weight of the evidence became undeniable, David's demeanor shifted from denial to a cold, chilling anger. The charming, loving man Mark thought he knew vanished, replaced by a cornered animal. He didn't apologize. He didn't show remorse. Instead, he tried to justify his actions, to twist the narrative until Mark was somehow the one at fault. He claimed he felt trapped, that he had made a mistake years ago and didn't know how to get out. The excuses were hollow, self-serving words designed to absolve him of any real responsibility for the lives he was destroying. The argument raged for hours, a toxic back and forth of accusations and bitter recriminations. The house that had once been a home filled with love became a battleground. Every shared memory was weaponized, every tender moment reframed as a calculated lie. For Mark, the confrontation was not a release, but a new kind of torture. Seeing the man he loved reveal a complete lack of empathy, a selfish core he had never suspected, was more painful than the initial betrayal. The dream wasn't just dead, it was being desecrated before his very eyes. The love had curdled into something ugly and unrecognizable. Days turned into a week of unbearable tension. David refused to leave. He also refused to end his other life. He seemed to believe he could somehow maintain both worlds, that Mark would eventually accept this new, monstrous reality. He would move through the house like a ghost, his presence a constant, suffocating reminder of the betrayal. The silence was worse than the shouting. It was a cold war fought in the hallways and the kitchen, where glances were daggers and every closed door was a declaration of hostility. Mark felt like a prisoner in his own home, trapped with the architect of his misery. The breaking point came on a cool September evening. Mark had been clear. David had to choose. It was him or the family in Texas. It was this life or that one. He couldn't have both. He laid down the ultimatum, his voice shaking with a mixture of grief and resolve. He needed a final answer. He needed the lies to stop, one way or another. He needed to know what his future, or lack thereof, would be. The hope that David would choose him, that he would beg for forgiveness and try to salvage what was left of their marriage, was a tiny, flickering flame in the darkness of his heart. David's response was not what Mark had hoped for. He didn't choose. Instead, he became enraged. The ultimatum seemed to flip a switch, pushing him from calculated deception into pure, unadulterated fury. He accused Mark of trying to ruin his life, of being selfish, of not understanding the pressure he was under. The argument escalated quickly, the volume of their voices rising until they were screaming at each other. The last vestiges of love and respect evaporated in the heat of the moment, replaced by raw, primal anger. It was no longer a fight about a relationship. It was a battle of wills, a desperate struggle for control. The air crackled with menace. David's eyes, once so full of warmth, now held a terrifying emptiness. The argument moved from the living room to the kitchen, the space growing smaller, more claustrophobic. Words were no longer enough. The rage had to go somewhere. In that moment, Mark looked at his husband and saw not the man he had married, but a monster, a man capable of anything. The love story had reached its final, horrifying chapter. The fight wasn't about saving their marriage anymore. Suddenly, it was about survival. In the heat of that final, terrible argument, something snapped. The shouting stopped. A chilling silence fell over the kitchen, more frightening than the rage that preceded it. David's face was a mask of cold fury. He moved with a sudden, terrifying purpose. He reached for a knife block on the counter. The polished wood and gleaming steel, once part of their shared domestic life, became implements of a nightmare. Mark saw the movement, but his mind couldn't process it fast enough. Disbelief warred with a primal scream of terror rising in his throat. This wasn't real. This couldn't be happening. The attack was brutal and swift. The man who had once promised to love and protect Mark now turned on him with unimaginable violence. The pain was sharp, searing, a blinding white light that eclipsed everything else. It was the pain of the blade, but it was also the pain of the ultimate betrayal. The person he had shared his life with, his heart with, was now trying to end it. The shock was so profound, it was paralyzing. In those last horrific moments, all the lies, the heartbreak, and the anger converged into a single point of agony. The aftermath was a scene of pure horror. The quiet of the house was broken only by the sound of sirens wailing in the distance, a mournful cry that came too late. David did not flee. He simply waited, the rage draining from him, replaced by a hollow emptiness. When the police arrived, they found a scene that would haunt them for years to come. They found the tragic end to a story of love and deceit. The man who had tried so desperately to live two lives had, in the end, destroyed them both and taken a life in the process. The news sent shockwaves through two families in two different states. In one home, a community mourned the loss of a beloved friend. In another, a wife and child were left to grapple with the monstrous truth about the husband and father they thought they knew. The double life had collapsed, not in a courtroom or a therapist's office, but in a brutal act of violence that left no room for reconciliation or understanding. The secret was finally out, exposed in the most tragic way imaginable. The perfect life was revealed to have been a perfect lie, and the cost of that lie was a human life. In the wake of the murder, a heavy silence descended. The story became a headline, a cautionary tale whispered among friends and neighbors. For those who knew Mark and David, it was a tragedy that defied comprehension. How could a love that seemed so real, so vibrant, end in such darkness? People tried to find answers, to connect the dots between the smiling couple they saw at parties and the grim reality of what happened behind closed doors. They looked back at old photographs, searching for a sign, a clue they had all missed, but found nothing but happy memories now tainted by a horrifying truth. The legal process unfolded with a grim inevitability. David was arrested, charged, and eventually convicted of murder. In the courtroom, the full, sordid details of his double life were laid bare for the world to see. He was no longer the charming young husband or the doting father. He was a killer, his future now defined by prison walls and the memory of his terrible act. His Texas family was left to pick up the pieces of a life built on a lie, their identities forever linked to a man who was both a husband and a murderer. There was no closure for them, only the lifelong burden of his deceit. For Mark's family and friends, the grief was a vast, empty ocean. They had lost a son, a brother, a friend, but they had also lost their faith in the simple goodness of people. The betrayal was not just Mark's, it was shared by everyone who had welcomed David into their lives, who had believed in the love story. How do you recover from that? How do you learn to trust again when someone you loved and trusted proved to be a monster in disguise? The questions lingered long after the trial was over, hanging in the air with no easy answers. And so, the story ends not with a resolution, but with an absence. An empty chair at the dinner table. A home once filled with laughter, now silent. A future that was stolen. The tragedy is not just in the act of murder itself, but in the slow, creeping poison of deception that preceded it. It serves as a chilling reminder that the people we love can hold secrets we can't even imagine, and that sometimes the discovery of those secrets can lead to a place from which there is no return, a place of silence and of sorrow.